The charge I've been given is to kind of talk about technology as it relates to animal health. And so my background is on the beef side and dairy as well. So for those of you who want poultry and swine examples, just imagine the cattle smaller, okay? Because that's really the best option you've got. And so kind of to lay the groundwork for this, I'm going to give you kind of an overview of some opportunities from precision agriculture and not so much specific. So if you're looking for, here's the 5 sensors or bits of technology to take home today, that's not really my goal. My goal is more to stimulate the conversation around what are technology opportunities that exist that ultimately can be deployed on the farm that allow for better interaction with animal health companies, with feed companies, with regulatory agencies, veterinarians, and nutritionists alike. Okay, so that's kind of the approach that I've taken to the topic. And so we're going to look at how technology offers solutions to animal health. But to do that, I think we have to have a pretty decent grasp on what it is about technology that allows this to move forward. Right? And so I'm going to talk through why we are able to even have this conversation today. And some of these you may be familiar with. I work for a technology company, and some of this was new to me. Right? So if I had told you that there are more mobile connections than there are people on the planet through Slido, would you have known that? Right? Because I didn't. And there are about 5 million unique mobile subscribers compared to the 7.7 million people. So that's about 1.75 mobile connections per person, right? And so if you think about it, some of you are like, well, I got a phone, I've got a tablet, I've got an e-reader. Some of you are above average in that front. Some of you have one, right? But that mobile connectivity is what really starts to allow us to think about precision agriculture, right? Because now I'm not tied to interacting with my trusted advisors and the animals and the environment they're in by being tied to a landline or a desktop, right? And so one of the things I think is intriguing is this is some data that looks at how those connections are projected to grow over time. So over the next 6 years, so you got 2019 here kind of in the middle. And so what you can see is the mobile connectivity, which is the white line, relative to phones, and kind of you add some land connections there as well. That seems pretty stagnant, right? So we're relatively saturated on mobile connections from communication standpoint. But what I want to show is look at the 2.5-fold increase projected in Internet of Things connectivity over the next 6 years. Right, so Internet of Things, some of you are thinking about, well, that's Alexa, that's my refrigerator that tells me to buy milk on the way home. But that's also the sensors that are in livestock. That's also the tractor that the producer is driving to feed hay. That's many of the things that we don't even think about that are connected, whether it's our car or things in our home. And so that line is going to continue to grow. And those are the opportunities we have to get connected and gather more information in a passive manner that enables much of this precision agriculture. And so one of the things we get pushback immediately when we start talking about technology is like, well, if you think about that in the context of agriculture and rural areas, connectivity's miserable out there, and so this will never work. Right? And so when I drive from Columbia, Missouri to Ames, where our office is, there's a window of 3G where I just prepare not to be on the phone, right? And I recognize that is a problem. But the thing we often forget about is, so connectivity is going to continue to get better, but what has happened at the same time is the cost and availability of data storage has done what? Gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So we can store data in a way that allows us so once we get to connectivity, we can push a lot of information in short order. The cost of data storage is so inexpensive, I got a free thumb drive from the government today. Right? I was out there in the lobby. And so as we think about the opportunity from a precision agriculture, I just want to kind of lay the groundwork for those pushbacks we get as we can't push the data forward and we can't store it. Those things are going to continue to get better every day. Right? And so the other aspect of NIAA, if you're only involved on the antimicrobial front, there's a lot of work around traceability and animal identification, right? And so as we think about that, there's a lot of pushback about data privacy and how we're going to handle that. And so I'm going to show you some data that really is going to fly in the face of data privacy, right? So how connected are we? This is data as to phone use in the toilet. Not the best time to take a picture, right? And that 3 out of 4 Americans use their mobile device in the bathroom. Most private room in your home. So for those who say people are not going to use mobile devices in agriculture, I say they're using it in the bathroom. Right? They are going to use it in their daily life. Men, you're more guilty than women. 80% of men use it in the bathroom. 70% of women. Right? And so those of you, they're from people from many different states. If you're in a darker state, this is one case where you're above average. Right? You're above average in the toilet phone use. Okay, and so, again, a bit of comic relief. It's late in the day. Right? But this is just a bit of a challenge to our mindset as we think about, well, producers are not going to use technology. It's everywhere, right? And so precision agriculture offers us a lot of opportunities from a technology standpoint. And really the reason, as Lucas illustrated, I'll reiterate here, is because labor is significantly challenging us every day in agriculture. Right, and I could quote the statistics about the percentage that's involved in agriculture continuing to decline, but to a certain extent, that's a champion of efficiency, right? 1% of us can be involved in food production, so 99% of us can be involved in other things. That's pretty awesome, really. But we have challenges from a veterinary perspective. We have a labor shortage in a veterinary perspective. Dr. Tom will talk about some of the challenges we have with caretakers providing for cattle in the feed yards and finding good help that we can retain for long periods of time. I welcome the day when there's autonomous feed truck drivers. To be honest with you, the idea that we don't have to have people driving around delivering feed, that would be pretty awesome. Right? And we've even started to replace labor in dairies where we have robotic milkers, robotic feed pushers, and a number of different opportunities where that technology already exists, right? And so that's going to continue to ramp up. And so these are places where we think about labor, but what I'm going to challenge you to think about is how do we optimize labor and keep the stockman in caring for the stock, right? Because at the end of the day, the story that I would tell you is I learned about how to take care of stock because I had to wait for the water to fill up. Right? How many of you watered livestock before there were automatic waterers? That's how I learned to identify sick animals. Because I had to sit there and wait for the tank to fill up. So I looked and I observed and I made observations about what looked normal and what didn't. Today we have automatic waterers, and so that stockman skill, we have to think about what opportunities technology present for us to augment that. Okay, and so I would suggest there are 3 challenges for us to wrangle when we talk about precision animal management. The first is we have to be able to aggregate data from multiple sources. And so I'm going to talk about each of these in more detail. This is kind of an overview. The next is we need to provide individual management opportunities within a pen. Right? And so we house animals in pens, but if we want to precisely manage that individual, somehow we have to figure out a way to manage that animal within the pen. And then the last one that's maybe the most interesting is to understand how individual animals differ from normal. Right? In that one of the biggest challenges we have is to know what a normal animal looks like and its signs to identify when it's not normal or feeling sick. Right? So those are kind of the 3 challenges that I'll lay out for us to wrangle this afternoon. Okay, so I think a picture says 1,000 words. This is an example of some of the data we need to be prepared to aggregate. Right, so I've got genetic information there on the DNA card. I've got cow comfort and the environment down there in the lower right-hand corner. I got temperature, humidity, weather. I've got how much feed the animals were fed, whether the diet was mixed correctly, how long they've been in that pen. I've got the animal processing crew, what vaccines they were given at arrival, whether they're going to be reimplanted or treated later. And then I could put up one of 300 different sensors on the top of that. Right? And so the challenge today, and in the middle, I've got the animal of interest. I think the challenge today is each of those bits of information comes to the producers in the room in a unique format. Right? Each one of them talks to the producer in a unique way. Right? And so I think the challenge going forward from a technology standpoint is where is the opportunity to interface all of that information together? Right? How do we communicate in a way that the producer can actually start to make decisions from all of that information? Because I may have some genetic information stored over here, I may have some feed information stored over here, but how do I ultimately make decisions from that? Right? And so as we think about the opportunity that exists from a technology standpoint, it's ultimately, right, we're all drowning, or we all data-rich, information poor. Right? We're drowning in data. We do not lack for data in many cases. It's how do we take technology and move towards the top. Right? And so the story I like to tell is my dad has 25 years of those red books, Dave, where he has kept cow information. Not a decision one been made out of that, but we got all 25 years worth of information. And so the real barrier to precision livestock management is moving above the bottom. Right? And so I've just shown two facets of animal health. Right? So what is the vaccine program and what is nutrition? If we start to move up that, we can add any number of other facets. We could add genetics. We could add environment. And so the more of those facets we add, the harder the decision gets to, right? The benefit of precision agriculture where we're heading today is with machine learning and AI, I don't have to know a whole lot about what's going on. I have to be willing to let the computers run loose on the information to help me make decisions. The key then becomes how do I get data entered into the system in a manner that it's useful to me. Right? And so for those who have technology in the room, the opportunity is how do I get information pushed in a seamless way where it doesn't involve the producer putting the information in. Right? And so how, from a precision management standpoint, how can I get good data in a seamless way where the computing power can transfer information, knowledge, and into the decisions? And that's not to say that computers are the only ones that have that figured out. Right? I need to take advisors like Dr. Tom that can provide input into this system as well. Right? Because we don't want machines managing the stock. And so technology going forward has got to be able to integrate all of those sources of information in a meaningful way that leads to a decision that the producer can make in real time. So the next segment is how do we manage the individual within a pen? Right? And so I use this picture to show, right, there are no single pen feed yards anywhere in the United States. And so what technology opportunities are there that we can deploy that allow me to manage that individual while he's with 250 of his friends? Right? Because that is how we think about animal health, is I am managing the individual, but the environment around him has a lot to do with that. And so as we think about enhancing technologies, we've done a fair amount of that, actually, and addressed the labor issues we've talked about. Right? Is there are technologies today that allow for growth promotants to be released over time via technologically advanced coatings. Right? So I've reduced the number of labor incidents. I don't have to get that animal back through the chute. We have dewormers now that have longer activation times, and so I can treat that individual animal and it persists for a longer time. We've talked about antimicrobials that have longer persistence times and allow us to be more specific with that individual animal in a pen. The challenge becomes, how do I think about optimizing the animal from an endpoint perspective? Right? As Lucas talked about, the idea of how do we optimize and minimize the amount of greenhouse gas that we use, the amount of resources that we use and go back to how can I monitor the success of this animal in a pen. Right? That's the challenge that we have. Right? Because if we manage them as 250 head in together, I can assure you half of them are overdone and half of them are underdone. That's the rule of math. Right? And so technology, as we think about it, provides us opportunities, sorting opportunities and technology opportunities where I can see where that individual animal is growing on his own. And so there's some examples of that type of technology that exist. If you're not familiar with it, there are individual feeding systems that look at how much that animal is eating, how much that animal is gaining, and gives a signal to the producer that says he has reached market endpoint. The challenge is those are not exactly economically feasible today, right? But the cost of technology will continue to decline over time. But this is still a challenge from an animal health perspective, right? And so when we think about, the computer I'm pointing at is over here. So when we think about managing animal health, this is the challenge that I lay out. I think the technology has the greatest opportunity in, right? And that I have a number of veterinary friends. I'm a nutritionist by training, and so my veterinary friends like to tell me how I think about things wrong. And they've always coached me as to, Justin, I want to train you to identify the healthy animal, because I can never prepare you to know what every sick one looks like. If you know what healthy looks like, you can identify the sick ones. The challenge is defining health. If I just look up basic vital statistics on a healthy animal, we have a temperature range of 3 degrees, respiration rate with 3-fold difference, a pulse with a 2x difference, and a water intake with 2x difference. And I would suggest in the room, if we just use each of you as an example, right? Some of you drink a lot of water today and some of you don't. And that's normal for you, right? Each of you has a different normal. And so as we think about monitoring animal health, how do we identify what's normal for Justin versus what's normal for you and separate the deviations, right? Because the deviations is when we start to see opportunities to make decisions on animal health. And so as we think about a bit of technology, this is an example of how we think about approaching that, right? So this is where we're trying to look at how can we enhance the behavior of the animal and take advantage of that and make better informed decisions from a labor standpoint as well as antibiotics. You made the comment today about laddering down on antibiotics. I'd not heard that before, but I think one of the challenges as a producer myself I face is like I have a choice of 5 antimicrobial products. I'm going to look at which one's the most effective. If I'm able to detect that disease in an earlier manner, or I know more about that disease, now I can make a more informed decision and will feel more confident in laddering down. Right? If I'm not confident in laddering down, I'll start at the top, and that makes it harder for me. And so here's an example where if we think about the traceability model that this group has kicked around, the idea of how do we deploy an identification system, what I challenge the group to think about is we have an identification system that we add additional value to, and we take advantage of behavior. Right? This is an example of I'm monitoring these cattle at the water tank, right? So that's why I use water as an example in that if that steer in the back comes to the water tank 5 times every day, and one day he only comes 4 times, that's a deviation from normal. That's statistical process control for the mechanical engineers in the room, right? It's preventative maintenance on machines. We look for deviations, and those deviations give us a signal that says this animal needs attention, right? And so you can use water as an example. We can use technology that ultimately looks at feed as an example. There are a number of examples where we measure the very precise amount of feed that the animal eats, or we can just measure whether they come to the bunk, they spend the same amount of time at the bunk that they normally do, they're in the same general location at the bunk that they normally are, and that gives us some indication as to their health or wellness. We can even expand on that to say we know how big the animal is based off of a growth model, and we use this technology to sort them into outcome groups in an automated manner. I've used 2 beef examples. The thing that the dairymen have as an advantage over us is they see those cows 2 to 3 times a day in an individual manner. Right? They can deploy technology in a parlor because the animal is in front of them 2 to 3 times a day. They're already caught. Right? The challenge in a beef model is those systems exist. Ultimately, we still have to figure out how to manage that individual within the pen. And so we've spent a lot of time on animal health here. My goal is to kind of illustrate a way where we look at just general behavior management in the context of a traceability solution that provides us a tag where we can look at that animal over the course of its lifetime and ultimately manage it for better health and prioritize the attention to the producer. And that's the part I'll leave you with. As I started with, labor is a significant challenge, and we don't look to not take care of the animals well, but how can we use technology to enhance their care? And taking advantage of behavioral and deviations from normal that we can measure today like we've never been able to measure before is really the opportunity from a precision livestock standpoint that I think we have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Tom to talk about some specific technology.